Mic check. Mic.
Yes, yes, yes.
Morning, everyone. We're just going to give people another 2 or 3 minutes before we get started. Good morning again, ladies and gentlemen. Fellow shareholders, my name is Ivan Anderson, and I've been asked by the board to chair today's meeting, given that our chairman, Mr. Charles Pardee, who you'll hear from later, is overseas and unable to travel given the global travel restrictions. It is my pleasure to extend to you all, our shareholders, a very warm welcome to our annual general meeting. It's the first since our company was listed on the Jamaica Stock Exchange. This year's AGM is obviously very different, given the restrictions imposed as a result of the coronavirus. And it makes it not possible to have all our shareholders present with us in person. As a consequence, and you may be aware, TransJamaica Highway joined the application to the courts to allow the holding of what is called a hybrid meeting, which facilitates the attendance of shareholders both in person as well as via an online platform. We had to take this approach to ensure our safety and comply with the orders under the Disaster Risk Management Act and still proceed to conduct the business of the company. I'd like to therefore especially acknowledge our shareholders, invitees, and directors who are also participating online. Please be advised also that the meeting is being recorded. At this time, let me introduce to you, in addition to myself, members of the Board of Directors who are present in person. Mr. John Mitchie Bell, Chairman of the Audit Committee, Mr. Alok Jan, and Mrs. Suzanne Garrikus Brown, the Company Secretary. Our directors present via online platform are Mr. Charles Pardee, I mentioned earlier, Chairman of TGH, Mr. Ian Dare, and Mrs. Julie Thompson-James, Chairperson of the Governance Committee. Members of our management team are also present. Mrs. Garrikus Brown, our Finance Manager, Mr. Melbourne Link Cook, our Quality and Maintenance Planning Engineer, and Mr. Thierry Parizeau, our Managing Director, who is also online. We'll now invite Mrs. Garrikus Brown to offer a word of prayer.
Thank you, Chair. Morning, everyone. Let us pray. Dear Lord, we thank you for today and for the opportunity to come together to discuss our company's business. We thank you that though we are apart, we are still able to connect through the use of technology. We thank you for the leadership and management of our company and also for our fellow shareholders. We ask that you govern today's meeting and let everything be done to your glory. In your Son's name we pray. Amen.
Thank you, Suzanne. I've been advised by the Company Secretary, Mrs. Garrikus Brown, that in accordance with the company's Articles of Association, a quorum is present. So I now declare the annual general meeting open and duly constituted. I've also been advised that we have no apologies for absence. Suzanne? I'd also like to acknowledge the presence of Mr. Winston Robinson, partner, and Mrs. Carisse Lewis, audit manager of EY, the company's external auditors. Welcome, sir. The Jamaica Central Securities Depository, our registrar and transfer agent, is represented by Ms. Tamika Ricketts, Ms. Bridget Gale, and Ms. Chantel Scarlett Dennis. And they are also present. I'd now like to introduce the chairman of the board of TGH, Mr. Charles Pardee, who has in fact been the chairman of TGH since the very inception of the company and has taken it through the various restructurings, including last year, to give his opening remarks.
Dear shareholders, I am pleased on behalf of our board to welcome you to TGH 19th Annual General Meeting here at the Jamaica Pegasus Hotel. On behalf of the board, let me thank you most sincerely for your overwhelming support for the company in the take-up of shares in the offer for sale, which closed on March the 2nd this year. It was and is still the largest share offer in Jamaica's history, both in the amount raised, which is 14 billion, and the number of participating investors, which is over 36,000. TGH has already a long history. It has been 19 years since TransJamaican Highway Limited was formed and 17 years since we commenced our operations with the opening of the first toll plaza at our Vineyards location back in 2003. The T2 corridor connecting Kingston to Portmore was opened in 2006, and the full T1 corridor connecting Kingston to Maypen was opened in 2012. It has been a continuous success since, and TGH has had its best year in terms of traffic and revenue in 2019, which is reflected in the accounts that we are presenting today. Over 24 million vehicles utilized the toll road, a continuation of the performance experienced over the last 6 years, with a total volume of vehicles growing at almost 5% a year between 2014 and 2019. Unfortunately, this all changed with the arrival of the COVID-19 global pandemic in March this year. To fight against the spread of this pandemic, the government implemented health and safety measures, which consequently impacted the travel habits of our customers. Island-wide curfews, a temporary lockdown of the parish of St. Catherine, the work-from-home order, the closure of the country's borders, etc. We experienced in April the worst downturn in traffic with minus 52%, but the decrease in traffic over 1 year from January to October is only now at minus 16.4%. We will talk about that in more details later. Despite these challenges, TGH continues to make all its debt service payments to its bondholders without drawing any funds from its reserve accounts. The board has also approved the payment of dividends of 7.48 cents per stock unit in December 2020. The continuation of this trend will remain highly dependent on any new measures that could still be implemented by the government of Jamaica in the coming months to combat the effect of the pandemic. As a result of this uncertainty and the impact on the economic activity, it is unfortunately difficult to establish new forecasts for the end of this fiscal year. As a conclusion, I want to highlight that the current situation does not prevent TGH from continuing to work on the many development opportunities available to TGH. Whether in Jamaica with the extension of Highway 2000 to Mandeville, which we will talk about more later, or elsewhere, we want to stay as a leading player in road development for the benefit of the shareholders of TGH and the well-being of the population of Jamaica. I now hand over to Ivan Anderson for conducting this meeting.
Thank you, Chairman. A few housekeeping matters before we continue. Just to remind persons online that if they have questions, they can send their questions to tjhighways@h2k-tjh.com. Let me just repeat that. TJH. Let me start again. TJ Highway. TJHIGHWAY at h2k-tjh.com. So if you have questions online, you can send questions to this email address, and we'll have a session later during the meeting for dealing with those questions. And just a reminder, for any questions we're not able to answer during the meeting, we'll answer those after the meeting has concluded. The notice of the meeting and the form of proxy were dispatched to all shareholders on record as at October the 30th, 2020. In accordance with the company's articles of incorporation, if there is no objection, I propose that the notice of the meeting be taken as read. Can I get somebody to move that motion? Mr. Bloomfield. Thank you, Mr. Bloomfield. Seconded by Janet Coleman Hallett. Thank you, Janet. All in favor? Anyone against? I declare the motion carried. I'd also like to put forward a motion for the order of the resolutions to be changed so as to have the second resolution, which concerns the election of the directors, be passed as the last resolution. Can I get somebody to move the motion? Suzanne? Yes. Seconded by? Thank you, Ms. Gordon. All in favor? Anyone against? I declare the motion carried. The purpose of this annual general meeting is to seek the approval of the shareholders for the respective resolutions outlined in the notice. The resolutions are duly set out in the notice of the AGM dated the 28th day of October 2020 and duly signed by the company secretary. The procedure for the meeting will be as follows. So the first item of ordinary business is the adoption of the audited financial statements for the year ended 2019, December 31st, 2019, together with the reports of the directors and auditors thereon. The second item is the election of the directors, which will now be done as the last resolution. The third item is to fix the remuneration of the directors. The fourth item of business is the appointment of the auditors, Ernst & Young, and that the board be allowed to fix the auditor's remuneration. And finally, the fifth item of special business is to amend the articles of incorporation by special resolution. Now we'll conduct the business of the meeting as set forth in the notice. In order to conduct an orderly meeting and give all eligible shareholders an opportunity to participate, we'll follow the procedures mentioned earlier. Questions and comments from the floor should pertain to the items on the notice. I ask that persons in attendance wishing to speak to raise their hand, and you'll be provided with a microphone where you'll state your name and status as a shareholder for the record. The first resolution. In accordance with Article 179 of the Company's Articles of Incorporation, the company is obligated to lay before this meeting the audited financial statements, together with the reports of the directors and auditors, which are contained in the company's annual report for the year ended December 31st, 2019. For anyone who didn't get a copy of the annual report, they are also available outside at the door. I'll now ask Mr. Winston Robinson from EY to read the auditor's report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, everybody. Independent Auditor's report to the members of TransJamaican Highway Limited. Report on the financial statements. Opinion. We have audited the financial statements of TransJamaican Highway Limited, the company, which comprise the statement of financial position as at December 31, 2019, the statements of comprehensive income, changes in equity, and cash flows for the year then ended, and notes comprising significant accounting policies and other explanatory information. In our opinion, the accompanying financial statements give a true and fair view of the financial position of the company as at December 31, 2019, and of its financial performance and cash flows for the year then ended in accordance with International Financial Reporting Standards and the Jamaican Companies Act. Basis of opinion. We conducted our audit in accordance with international standards in auditing. Our responsibilities under those standards are further described in the auditor's responsibilities for the audit of financial statements section of our report. We are independent of the company in accordance with International Ethics Board for Accountants Code of Ethics for Professional Accountants, and we have fulfilled our other ethical responsibilities in accordance with the IASBA code. We believe that the audit evidence we have obtained is sufficient and appropriate to provide a basis for our audit opinion. Responsibilities of management and the board of directors for the financial statements. Management is responsible for the preparation of financial statements that give a true and fair view in accordance with IFRS and the Jamaican Companies Act, and for such internal control as management determines is necessary to enable the preparation of financial statements that are free from material misstatement, whether due to fraud or error. In preparing the financial statements, management is responsible for assessing the company's ability to continue as a going concern as applicable, matters related to going concern, and using the going concern basis of accounting unless management either intends to liquidate the company or to cease operations or has no realistic alternative but to do so. The board of directors is responsible for overseeing the company's financial reporting process. Auditor's responsibilities for the audit of the financial statements. Our responsibilities are to obtain reasonable assurance about whether the financial statements as a whole are free from material misstatement, whether due to fraud or error, and to issue an auditor's report that includes our opinion. Reasonable assurance is a high level of assurance, but is not a guarantee that an audit conducted in accordance with ISOs will always detect a material misstatement when it exists. Misstatements can arise from fraud or error and are considered material if, individually or in the aggregate, they could reasonably be expected to influence the economic decisions of users taken on the basis of these financial statements. As part of an audit in accordance with ISOs, we exercise professional judgment and maintain professional skepticism throughout the audit. We also identify and assess the risk of material misstatement of the financial statements, whether due to fraud or error, design and perform audit procedures responsive to those risks, and obtain audit evidence that is sufficient and appropriate to provide a basis for our opinion. The risk of not detecting a misstatement resulting from fraud is higher than for one resulting from error, as fraud may involve collusion, forgery, intentional omissions, misrepresentations, or the override of internal control. Obtain an understanding of internal control relevant to the audit in order to design audit procedures that are appropriate in the circumstances, but not for the purpose of expressing an opinion on the effectiveness of the company's internal control. Evaluate the appropriateness of the accounting policies used and the reasonableness of accounting estimates and related disclosures made by management. Conclude on the appropriateness of management's use of the going concern basis of accounting, and based on the audit evidence obtained, whether material uncertainty exists related to events or conditions that may cast significant doubt on the company's ability to continue as a going concern. If we conclude that a material uncertainty exists, we are required to draw attention in our auditor's report to the related disclosures in the financial statements, or if such disclosures are inadequate, to modify our opinion. Our conclusions are based on the audit evidence obtained up to the date of our auditor's report. However, future events or conditions may cause the company to cease to continue as a going concern. Evaluate the overall presentation, structure, and content of the financial statements, including the disclosures, and whether the financial statements represent the underlying transactions and events in a manner that presents a true and fair view. We communicate with the Board of Directors regarding, among other matters, the planned scope and timing of the audit and significant audit findings, including any deficiencies in internal control that we identify during our audit. Report on additional matters as required by the Jamaican Companies Act. We have obtained all the information and explanations which, to the best of our knowledge and belief, were necessary for the purposes of our audit. In our opinion, proper accounting records have been maintained so far as appears from our examination of those records, and the financial statements, which are in agreement therewith, give the information required by the Jamaican Companies Act in the manner required. Signed, Ernst & Young Chartered Accountants, Kingston, Jamaica, May 11, 2020. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Robinson. Further, yes, sir. Yep, Mr. Staple.
Item or two would have been shown to us as shareholders. But I find it very strange, Mr. Chair, for an
All right.
audit to be done and there were no key audit items. I find it very strange for this report, Mr. Chair. Very strange.
All right, thank you, Mr. Staple. As I'm not sure if you were here earlier when we discussed the question and answer session, but we'll have a question and answer session shortly where we'll have an opportunity to ask questions and for the board and the auditors to respond. All right, so further to the presentation of the auditor's report, we'll now have the director's report. And this report will be presented by myself along with Suzanne on behalf of the managing director. So the report is expected to cover a number of areas, looking at highlights from the 2019 year, changes which have taken place between 2019 2020, talk about some governance issues, and obviously the impact of COVID. How has COVID impacted the traffic and revenues along the highway? We're going to talk a little bit about outlook for the future, a little bit on the stock price movement which have taken place since March through now, and then we'll delve in a little deeper into the 2019 results and where we are for 2020. Following this, we'll have a question and answer session where both persons online and persons who are in attendance will have the opportunity to ask questions. Again, just a reminder for people online, if you have questions, you can email them to tjhighway@tjh-h2k.com. All right, so up until December of 2019, TransJamaica Highways was owned by four shareholders. IFC, well, Proparco is a French bank, Bouygues, and Vinci. These are the four shareholders of TransJamaica Highway. Starting in 2019, NROC started to have a discussion with TransJamaica as to how we could do a number of things, how we could lower the interest costs of loans, which TransJamaica had, how we could diversify the ownership of TransJamaica, and how we could restructure the concession agreement itself in order to make the concession more attractive. So this objective set about a number of things happening. So the first thing which happened was we bought back all of the ordinary shares of TransJamaica from the existing shareholders. So we bought back all the shares from Bouygues, Vinci, IFC, and Proparco. And at the same time, we then went out and through an international bond raise, raised some additional funding, both to repay some short-term loans, which we took to buy out the existing shareholders, and to repay some existing short-term debt. And then in March, as you'd have been aware, we then took the company public with an IPO. So that transition meant that we moved from 4 existing shareholders in December of 2019 to 80% of the company being owned by the public by March of 2020. The major shareholders are listed, in addition to NROC, which holds 20% of the shares of TransJamaica. We have NCB, JMB, Musson, Guardian Life, Sagicor, etc. The directors' shareholdings are also shown on the slide. Over the year, a number of changes were also made to the governance of the company. So in 2020, we've had 8 directors' meetings. In 2019, we had 3 directors' meetings. But as important, in 2020, we implemented a number of committees of the board. The Auditor and Risk Management Committee, chaired by John Mitchie Bell. The Nominations and Compensation Committee, chaired by the chairman, Mr. Paradis, and the Governance Committee, chaired by Alok Jan. So all of these committees were formed with a charter for their operation. So up until 2019, the company saw consistent increases in revenues, in traffic and in revenues. Between 2016 and 2019, our traffic volumes grew by about 6% per annum every year. Over the same period, our revenues grew by about 10.5% every year between 2016 and 2019. And this growth actually continued into 2020. And for the first 2 months of the year, the traffic continued to increase. And then, as we're aware, on March 13th, we had the first lockdown as a result of COVID. And what that did was to bring down our traffic volumes from about 1.9 million vehicles per month in February down to about 1.5 million vehicles per month in March. Those lockdowns continued, and the result was further reduction in traffic volume. So in April, we had a total lockdown of St. Catherine, and that caused our traffic volumes actually to decline to about 940,000 vehicles per month by April. But the good thing is, as those lockdowns began to ease, so in April, we were down about 52% in terms of traffic year over year. But as the lockdowns began to ease, by May 1, the traffic started recovering. As the lockdowns eased even further, we got back to, in July, traffic volumes of about 1.7 million vehicles in that month. In August, we started seeing increased lockdowns taking place again. And by September the 7th, so between August 24th and September the 7th, the curfews which were in place changed the curfew hours from about 11 p.m., which is where they were at August 24th, to 8 p.m., where they were by September 7th. And that caused a reduction of about 13% year over year in terms of our traffic volumes. So after 8 months, obviously the impact of the global pandemic and the the restrictions imposed by the government continue to impact the traffic on the highway. During the third quarter of 2020, traffic was down by about 10.1% compared with 2019. And in September, we had a compounding issue, which was the non-reopening or the continued closure of schools for that period. At the time, we had expected schools to be reopened by October the 5th, but as we're all aware, that has now continued into November and is continuing. So between January and September, the decrease in traffic year over year is about 16.4%. So 2020, January through September, compared with 2019, January through September, we're down about 16.4%. And this makes, obviously, forecasting of traffic going forward difficult, because it's obviously going to be very dependent on what happens in terms of the restrictions which are imposed by the government of Jamaica. The difficulties that we're encountering obviously should not prevent us from planning for the future. And so one of the things we've done is to bring forward a number of the activities that we have been looking at. In the prospectus, we talked about a number of new initiatives that we had been looking at. And one of the major initiatives is obviously the extension of the highway from where it stops now at Maypen by the Rio Minna River, going to Williamsfield. So as we discussed, TJH has a right of first refusal to own and or operate the highway from Maypen to Mandeville. That highway is actually being constructed by the government of Jamaica, and therefore there are no construction risks associated with that project for TransJamaica. At the completion of that project, which is currently slated for October of 2022, the TJH has the right, as I said, to own and or operate that highway. We've brought forward the discussions, as I said, and we've had in our traffic advisor looking at the traffic volumes along the corridor, looking at the traffic volumes, from Maypen through Four Paths, through Osborne Store, through Clarendon Park, Porus, going into Williamsfield, to understand what are the likely tolls that could be charged, and therefore also what are the likely volumes of traffic and therefore revenues that we could expect on the roadway. So we have done both studies looking at the optimum toll rates, and from that projecting what we think are likely traffic volumes, which would be along the corridor. As I said, the current estimated completion date is 2022, and early next year, TransJamaica will be required to make a formal submission to NROC in relation to the right of first refusal that we discussed. At the same time, we've also been in discussions with a number of the developers who are building along the corridor. So, there are a number of developments going on. When you leave Spanish Town, by Chedwin Park, Jacaranda, Whitewater Meadows, there are a number of developments taking place along the Old Harbour Road. And we've been talking to those developers about how to get them onto the highway. Not only are those developments north of the highway taking place, but we're also aware that there are a number of developments taking place south of the highway in the Burn Lodge area. So Gores, Chemtech are developers undertaking developments in that southern area south of the highway. So we've been talking to them about how can we bring that traffic volume onto the highway by creating ramps in those locations. At the same time, we've been looking at a number of other initiatives. As you know, early this year, we opened a new petrol station at the Old Harbour Interchange, and we've been in discussions with Total again about a Portmore gas station, which would be just adjacent to the Causeway Toll Plaza. The land just to the east of the toll plaza is where the new filling station is proposed. We're also in discussion regarding a number of new offers for our customers. And I'll talk a little bit more about that when we talk about marketing. We're looking at modernizing of our toll system to make our toll system more efficient, and obviously continuing to explore the possibilities for real estate developments along the corridor. Not only do we have private developers doing developments along the corridor, but we also have NHT also doing developments along the corridor. And we're in discussions with both parties. At the same time, we're also looking at how we can strengthen our marketing activities. And most of you would have heard on the morning programs our frequent user rewards ad campaign, which has been on radio, SMS blasts, flyers, and website articles. Our T-Tag promotion campaign, our special 10% online bonus campaign. We've launched a mobile app as well as a number of other initiatives designed to drive additional traffic onto the highway. Not only are we focused on, obviously, on trying to bring more traffic onto the highway, but we've also been focused on ensuring that the highway is maintained in a good condition. We see what is happening on the rest of the Jamaica's network in terms of damage which has taken place on the rest of the country's network. In contrast, there have been no damages to the East-West Highway network at all. And last year, in 2019, we did a number of initiatives to continue that progress in order to ensure that the road was continued to be maintained in good condition. So we did about 154,000 meters of repaving of the roadway. And obviously what we do is to try and repave the roadway before we start having cracks, before we start having potholes occurring. We did a number of what we call lane markings. Obviously when we repave the highway, we also do lane marking. We did a number of upgrades to our tolling equipment and software. And if you've noticed, the highway has solar lights all the way along it, well, all the way at the interchanges, and we replace batteries and solar cells in those locations as well. Fencing is a continuous problem along the highway. We continue to be faced by theft of fencing, but we continue to replace fencing along the highway. We did about 9.5 kilometers of fence replacement, and obviously also signage along the highway was also done at the same time. Finally, just a comment on the stock price movements. Over the year, the stock has declined from about 141, which is where it was in January. And over the last few weeks, it has been trading around just a little less than $1.30. In fact, on November the 20th, it was trading at about $1.29. This is about 8.5% below the opening price in a market where the overall index had declined by about 24.2%. So we believe the stock price has held up fairly well. Where are we though in terms of the 2019 results and what has happened for 2020 year to date? And for that, I'll turn over to Suzanne, who will continue the report on behalf of the Managing Director.
Thanks. Okay. Good morning again, everybody. All right. So we will be looking at the 2019 financial statements, and I'll start with the statement of comprehensive income. So 2019 was again a very good year for TGH. We had revenue of 53.3 million for the year ended December 31st, 2019. Some of the key factors that affected or were impacted this revenue were: one, the construction works for the widening of the Nelson Mandela Highway. So Mandela Highway was completed more or less around mid-March of 2019. And we just want to point out the revenue growth immediately before the expansion began was around 6 to 8% between 2014 and 2016. For the years 2017 and 2018, we saw an increase in the revenue of about 40, from 14.3 and 13.7 respectively. And this was partly due to the traffic that was diverted to the toll road during the widening period. This growth trend slowed starting in March 2019 when the works were nearly completed. This resulted in a decline in the traffic for Portmore. However, we saw an increase in the traffic for Spanish Town. The overall traffic for 2019 increased by 1.1% when we compare to 2018. So we maintained the traffic that or most of the traffic that we got during the widening period. Another key item that affects our results is the refinancing of the multilateral banks and the subsequent capital restructuring. So in the fourth quarter of last year, a restructuring exercise began, which resulted in the repayment of the loans from the multilateral banks that were in place since 2011 and the purchase of 100% of the company's ordinary shares by NROC. This exercise continued in the first quarter of this year and resulted in a dividend being paid to NROC. The grant, and we speak further on the grant when we go on the balance sheet, the grant was written back, and this is a grant that was from NROC as well. There was a debt offering, an initial public offering of the ordinary shares, and a privately placed offering for secured notes with principal amount of 225 million, and that took place in February of this year. Other key factors are major maintenance, which the chair has already spoken about, and the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, also previously mentioned. All right, so we will look at the items from the statement of comprehensive income a little bit clearer. So we'll starting with revenue. So as I said, the revenue for the year was 53.3 million. This represents a CAGR of 8.9% between 2015 and 2019. Other gains and losses. Other gains and losses comprises primarily of the gains produced by income from investment instruments, revenue from secondary development, such as the gas station that was mentioned by the chair, income from the amortization of the grant from NROC. Financial year 2019 saw a 12% decrease compared to financial year 2018, and this resulted mainly from some change in treasury management, that is, funds that were invested in the restricted account were discontinued during the capital restructuring exercise. And there was also a slight increase in the amortization of the NROC grant, which fluctuates based on the performance in traffic. Operating expenses. The 2019 operating expenses consisted mainly of the operator's fee, and that's both a fixed and a variable fee, repairs and maintenance, insurance, and other items such as bank charges, utilities, etc. The key increase in operating costs over the prior year were the operator's fee, which increases in part due to the growth in revenue, as well as based on the CPI and the exchange rate. There was also some legal and professional fees that were incurred during the refinancing and subsequent capital restructuring. Admin expenses were 5% below that of the prior year and are comprised mainly of staff cost, depreciation of property, plant, and equipment, taxes, and other miscellaneous expenses. All right, so finance costs. So the main item for the finance cost, there was a significant increase due to breakage costs and penalties which were incurred for the repayment of the multilateral banks that we mentioned before. In terms of taxation, TJS was able to recognize a deferred tax asset of 21.4 million, which allowed a total comprehensive income for the year of 8.3 million when we compare to 6.3 million for the previous year. All right. So we also want to give you an idea of the company's performance in a from a different perspective, and we're representing the EBITDA of the company. And this is, we believe, is a supplemental information to investors and financial analysts on the company's operating performance in a comparative format for other companies in similar industries. The EBITDA margin has improved from 55.2% in 2014 to 62% in 2019. Okay, so we'll move on to the statement of financial position. For 2019, the company's primary asset, well, is the intangible assets, which represents the company's right under the concession agreement. We also want to point out that TGH also had 39.5 million in restricted cash, and this is US dollars at the end of financial year 2019. Moving on to the liabilities. So our primary liabilities are borrowings. And as we mentioned, we had the loans from the multilateral banks. These loans were refinanced on December 23rd, 2019 by a syndicate loan from NCB and also a bridge loan from NROC. We also had the NROC grant, which represents loans that were given to TGH over the period of our existence, and these were formulated into a grant in 2011 and was amortized on the basis of the traffic. There was also the derivative instrument, and this is the fair value of the interest rate swap, which was implemented based on the loans that we had for the multilateral banks. There's also the provision for renewals. The provision for renewals is for the repair represents the estimated cost to schedule repairs ranging from 10 years to the end of the concession, and is based on certain projections made over the course of the concession period. In terms of equity, share capital remained of 54 million USD at the end of the year 2019. Our shareholders' equity between financial year 2018 and financial year 2019, the net effect of refinancing the existing loans, the related breakage costs, and the recognition of the deferred tax had a net positive effect of USD 2.05 million on net profits for financial year 2019. And that is the end of my presentation. I will hand over back to our chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Suzanne. Before asking for the adoption of the audited financial statements, I now invite shareholders to comment or ask questions on the audited financial statements, the director's report, or the auditor's report. Questions may also be asked in relation to the conduct of the audit, content of the audit report, and accounting policies adopted by the company. Please address all questions to me, and I ask that you please state your name for the record prior to raising your questions or comments. I'll start with the question I think Mr. Staples has asked, and I'll ask Mr. Robinson to respond. I have a mic there.
Okay, just to respond to Mr. Staples' question, the year we're reporting on is financial year 2019. And at that point, TransJamaica was in fact a private company. It was not a listed entity. And the requirement to disclose key audit matters in the audit report relates to those entities.
Thank you, Mr. Robinson. Any questions from the audience? Anybody in attendance? Yes, Mr. Staple.
Mr. Chair, good morning to you,
Good morning,
members
sir.
of the board, fellow shareholders and employees. Mr. Chair, with your permission, I have 4 observations I would like to make before I ask my questions, with your permission.
Go ahead, Mr. Staple.
First of all, Mr. Chair, we would like to thank God for bringing us safely here today. Despite the challenges faced by us as Jamaica, we have been benefited from what is happening, and we ask God's blessing on us in our deliberations today. We invite him in our midst and ask him to bless us and guard us as we ask our questions. Mr. Chair, I would like to congratulate you, the members of the board, the hard-working employees, for the very good quality work displayed for the driving public. You gave us a well-presented management discussion and analysis. And Mr. Chair, this is the best I've seen in all the AGMs that I've attended. Very good and well-presented. And congratulations to the board, to the team members. And I'm sure when we leave here today, we will learn more about what is happening with TransJamaica. Congratulations to you, sir, and God's blessing go with you all. Thanks to your contribution and care of our young children in school, please continue to support our children at this age, because, Mr. Chair, without our help, our children are at severe risk, and we don't want that to happen. So we thank you for your continued contribution to the schools and to the children that you are helping. Thank you very much, sir. My first question, Mr. Chair. The remuneration paid to the chairman, board, and committee members and for attending board meetings is very excessive and should be reviewed. Your comments on that?
Is that your only question, Mr. Staple? You can just take all your questions at once.
I didn't get
I'm
that.
sorry. Is that your only question? Do you have any other questions, Mr. Staple?
I have 3 more questions.
All right. Can you just give us all the questions and then we can...
Mr. Chair, NROC agreed that existing shareholders of the company had no obligation to invest equity in Phase 1B. But even at December 23rd, 2019, the amendment was not finalized. And I would like your comments on that.
Sorry, you said Phase 1B or Phase 1C?
I didn't get that.
Which phase did you say? Phase 1B or Phase 1C?
That's on page 11. Page 21. Mr. Chair, am I correct in saying that 89.59 million US dollars of TransJamaica Highway outstanding debt was converted to an amortizing grant known as the NROC grant? And this amortization will be on projection of toll road traffic. If this toll road projection is not realized, what then happens to NROC grants? On page 54, Mr. Chair, what accounted for this significant reduction in staff welfare from 32 million to 11 million? And I would like for you to turn to page 5. Page 5, Mr. Chair. In 2018, Mr. Chair, total revenue, I mean everything, total revenue was 56.5 million US dollars, while your expenses was 50.2 million US dollars, which gave you a net profit of $6.4 million. For every dollar of revenue earned in 2018, 89 cents went to expense and 11 cents went to profit. In 2019, your total revenue was 78.6 million US dollars, and your expenses was 70.2 million US dollars, which gave you a net profit of 8.3 million. For every dollar earned in 2019, you spent 89 cents and 11 cents went to revenue. So although it appeared as though you made some profit, when we looked at the dollar figure, we are seeing that your profit was basically the same, while your expenses was literally the same. What is important, Mr. Chair? What is important? When you reach the 2018 figure in 2019, all that surplus revenue that you earned accounted for 22 million US dollars. And the expense for that $22 million was $20 million, which gave you $1.9 million profit, surplus, incremental profit. For every dollar of that incremental revenue, Mr. Chair, it cost you 91 cents and your profit was 9 cents. What I see here, Mr. Chair, is that we're at a level where our revenue appears to be increasing, but at the same time, the expenses are increasing in such a way that year over year, your profit remaining the same. Your comments on these questions.
Thank you, Mr. Staple. I'll ask Suzanne to answer the questions in relation to the financials.
Okay, so excuse me, Mr. Staple. You mentioned the figure for year 2019, revenue for 2019.
Mr. Chair, can you ask her to speak up a little louder for me?
Are you hearing me? You hearing me better?
Yes.
Okay, so you mentioned the revenue for 2019 being 76 million. I just want to be able to follow with you. If you could tell me the page you're on so I can follow with you. Are you reading from the financial statements?
Sorry,
Page 5.
Page 5, we have the profit and loss income.
All right, so we had on page 55 of the report is what I have.
Page 55, Mr. Staple, or page 5? 55.
What is the question again? Tell me what the question.
Repeat the question, Mr. Staple, so we can have it clearly.
I'm saying that year over year for 2018, What page?
Still on
page 5, because we have answered that question. What, for every dollar that you earned in 2018, it cost you 89 cents and the profit was 11 cents. The same is applicable for 2019. Although you appear to make more money, net profit, Your expenses was 89 cents and your profit was 11 cents. So therefore, there was no change basically on a dollar basis, what was earned and what was spent. It appears that there was some differences, but in truth and in fact, there was nothing. It remains the same. Why did this happen? And how do you plan to go forward with this so that this can be a change in this?
Okay, so for us, 2019 was an exceptional year in regards to the events that took place in the fourth quarter. So you will see there was there was growth in the revenue. So the revenue for 2018 was 52.4 million. Revenue for 2019 was 53.2 million. However, for if you look at our finance cost, you'll see that finance cost for 2018 was 15.3 million. However, in 2019, finance cost was more than twice that amount, 32.9 million, and this was because of the breakage fees that we paid regarding the refinancing of the multilateral banks. So our regarding the other expenses, you will see that our operating expenses and our admin expenses are more or less in line with the previous years, saving apart for inflation and other odd expenses. But the main item, the main difference for 2019 was impacted in the finance cost, and there was also some expenses relating to legal fees and such for the refinancing exercise and the sale of the shares.
So must I assume, Mr. Chair, through you to the financial controller, must I assume that despite the fact that you are book-wise, paper-wise, showing some improvement, one is balancing with the other. So in truth and fact, the net number that you are getting on a dollar basis is basically the same. So nothing new is happening. Are you in agreement with that?
Sorry, no, that's not what we're saying. I think what we're saying is that 2019 is an extraordinary year. We had significant breakage costs, as Suzanne mentioned before. Before 2019, the project was funded by the multilateral banks, IFC, IDB, European Investment Bank, and Proparco. In 2019, we then broke with the multilateral banks and did a new refinancing with the US bonds that we issued. That breakage led to significant additional costs in 2019. Those costs will not reoccur after 2019. There are only one-off costs for 2019.
So am I to understand, Mr. Chair, that for 2020,
Yes, yes,
despite the fact that there's a so-called pandemic,
yes. Not a so-called, but yes, a pandemic, yes.
despite the fact that there's a pandemic,
Yes, we
we are saying that 2020
yes,
should be a little bit different than 2019,
absolutely.
Financially.
In terms of our expenses, yes.
and that our people will continue to show an interest in driving more on the highway, so we'll make more money. But our expenses will be reduced so that instead of 11 cents versus 89 cents, we'll have 75 cents versus 25 cents. Am I correct?
No, so our expenses are expected to come down, yes. But as I said earlier, and as you saw in the presentation, Mr. Staple, our traffic volumes are coming down. So up until September, the year to date to September, our traffic volumes were down 13.6%, which means that you can expect similarly that our revenues will also be down.
Well, let's hope that going forward, we will have pandemic or no pandemic, we will continue to have.
Just to answer one other question that you raised about the remuneration of the directors. So what we did was that we asked PricewaterhouseCoopers to look at the remuneration paid to other companies on the stock exchange, and they recommended an average of those companies, which is what we've used as the basis.
Okay.
Any other questions from the Persons in attendance?
What about the
Let me have that gentleman behind you first, Mr. Stipp.
Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, fellow shareholder, I've been.
Your name for the record.
My
please,
name
sir.
is Mark Mary.
Mr. Mary.
Yes. I've been listening carefully to this argument of you end up back with a free reserve of 11 cents having gone through your income and expenditures. You end up with 11 cents, with some years in the past. But you people didn't explain about the value of the assets of the company, in relation to those mentioned times. I am hoping you can shed a little light on those, so when we left here, we know better what we are investing in. Also, prior to dealing with those matters, you in your discussion about the expansion or acquisition of gas stations, I am thinking also these acquisition or investments might be interesting, but it's coming to the time now where electric motor vehicles are going to need charges, and it will be appropriate for them to be needing charges on the highway. So I expect you're planning to be keen on that aspect, because they are what going to cause the update and what would be implemented with the older mechanical motors becoming obsolete, and we don't want to end up probably with too much of those investments, as legacies. So those are some of the things that I begin to wonder in my mind about the way forward. You would have to pay keen attention to some of these things. I think I have some more, but it slips me so far.
Thank you, Mr. Mary.
Yes, Mr. Mary, thank you for your question. You mentioned that you wanted some clarity on what is the company's asset, exactly what you're invested in. So our main asset is the infrastructure, what we
The
call.
value of the asset. Because also I noticed the shares aren't only listed in Jamaican dollars. They are in US too.
Yes.
And we should know how to measure against those type of appearance that we know where we're going, and and we can know if we are strong or weak.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Mary. Just to clarify, the assets of the company is primarily the concession agreement, which gives TransJamaica the right to own and operate the highway. The actual physical assets itself is owned by the government of Jamaica. So the roadway itself is owned by the government of Jamaica, but it is leased to TransJamaica Highways for 35 years, and if the option to extend is exercised, then to be leased for a further 35 years. So the land itself on which the highway is built is actually owned by the government of Jamaica, not by TransJamaica Highway itself. So you won't see that in our financial statements as an asset. What is an asset is the right that TJH has to operate the highway, to collect toll revenues, to manage the highway as we go forward. In relation to the charging of vehicles and the petrol stations, What we have been doing is in discussion with Total, who is the operator. What we've agreed with Total is to provide them with a space where Total is the entity that is constructing the gas station and then paying us a lease
An annual
and
lease fee, right? There's an annual lease fee. There's also a percentage on the earnings of total.
at those stations. So once we get to the stage where we start having more electric vehicles, what we'd anticipate is that those charging stations will be put in by Total in those stations as well.
I'm wondering if all will be relied on the gas station ownership or the total, because I think now that we are at the dawn of the electric motor vehicles, we probably should be having a registry of those things so that we can see where we need to implement the charging facility. And you know, Total should be keen on updating TransJamaica. You know, what are their urgencies or what are their projections
Right.
coming
Right.
closer to, you know, activities in relation to electric motor and charging and other things, like probably some of these equipment might not be ready for some of the ills that you people have on the highways. So we should even thinking to get some towing vehicles to assist some of these people who will have problem, because you don't want to rush in emergency and it become an expensive venture when you could plan ahead and source the vehicle from economical and reliable international suppliers.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Mary. Your comments are noted.
Okay then.
Let me read some questions that we have from the people online. Given the fallout, this Mrs. Colette Brown asked, given the fallout with COVID and the limited source of income being generated by TransJamaica, what steps are being taken to ensure and maintain new streams of income for the company and by extension the shareholders? Obviously, some of this we would have already dealt with as part of the presentation. We talked about the gas station is obviously one area that we talked about. We talked about the right of first refusal, which we expect will significantly impact the traffic on the highway. Based on the initial reviews that we have done, we expect that the traffic at along that leg from Maypen to Williamsfield will be similar to the traffic that we're seeing at Maypen and at Vineyard. So we expect a similar kind of impact. We talked about the new ramps, which we're looking at, the existing housing developments and the new housing developments which are taking place, especially along Old Harbour Road and those which are south of the highway in the Burn Lodge area. There are a total, I think, of 14,000 houses planned for that area south of the highway in the Burn Lodge area. So we're looking at how we can bring those vehicles onto the highway. We talked about the marketing that we're doing now and the additional marketing program that we're building in the to try and attract new customers onto the highway. Mr. Roger Bevan asked, an ad for the role of Managing Director of TransJamaica was published recently. Has the role been filled? And if so, by whom? And what experience is being brought to the table? Yes, an ad was placed, but no selection has been made to date. We're still reviewing the applications which were submitted. Are there any other questions from the floor? Go ahead, general questions in regards to the director's report presentation.
Mr. Chair, pleasant good morning. My name is Lanzel Bloomfield, shareholder. I have a number of questions. And the first one is page 54, note 20, under admin expense. There is a staff cost of US 682,000 for that of 2019, over the amount of US 543,000. What account for such a significant increase, and what is your staff complement?
Mr. Bloomfield, just go ahead with your second question and we can deal with both of them at the same time.
Same page 54, note 20, under operating expense. Your repairs and maintenance costs has jumped to a whopping US 615,000 in 2019 over that of US 46,000 in 2018. What has caused this increase? Thirdly, please clarify NROC role in relation to all the toll roads that have been constructed and that of TransJamaica Highway. And my last question is, in the resolution to be voted on and approved by the shareholders on electronic meetings, a number of companies are amending their articles of association. However, these amendments do not say at what point an electronic format will or should apply. Thank you for those.
All right, thank you, Mr. Bloomfield. I'll ask Suzanne to deal with the staff cost issue.
Okay, so thank you, Mr. Bloomfield. All right, so to start off with your first question regarding the staff cost and the staff complement. So for year 2019, we had a staff complement of 9 persons. You were asking also what would have caused the increase in staff costs. So the increase is generally the annual staff increase, salary increase, which is based on inflation, and there's also at the end of 2019, we had the restructuring of the package for the managing director based on the new agreement following the transition and the restructuring exercise that was done. Please.
Am I hearing it clearly that you're saying you currently has 9 persons?
No, for 2019, at present we have 8 persons.
8 persons?
Right.
In
For
relation,
all of that 8 persons, it is costing the company $682,000 US.
Okay, so there are also, I'd also mention that we do have some outsourced staff that are shared with the operator for 2019. There's about 5 staff members that are shared with the operator that would not be in the 9 permanent staff. We also have traffic wardens at some of the schools that were built, 2 of the schools that were built for phase 1B as a part of the arrangement for that. But yes, that is the staff cost for the staff complement of TGH.
in relation to the repair cost, Mr. Bloomfield, I think in my presentation we talked about repaving of the highway. So in 2019 we did a significant amount of repaving. So we actually did 154,000 square meters of repaving of the highway. The highway is repaved on a periodic basis. So typically every 10 years we carry out repaving works based on when it was last done. So in 2019 we did a significant amount of repaving, and that is what you see being showing up in our expenses. In relation to NROC's role in terms of TransJamaica, So NROC is what we call the grantor of the concession agreement. So there is a concession agreement which exists between NROC and TransJamaica. And it is that concession agreement that gives TransJamaica the right to design, build, finance, and operate the highway. So at the end of the concession period, if the option to extend is not taken up, then the highway comes back to NROC at the end of the day. But NROC has no role in the day-to-day operation of TransJamaica Highway.
Mr. Chair, before you go on any further, I understand all of that. But I am not getting a sense as to who really own all of these highways. So are these highways owned by NROC? Are they owned by TransJamaica Highway? Who really, what's the ownership structure?
So as I said before, so the lands on which the highway is built, both for the East-West Highway and for the North-South Highway, are owned by NROC on behalf of the government of Jamaica. The lands are then leased to the operator, to the developers, TransJamaica Highway in the case of East-West Highway. The operator or the developer has the option then to build along that roadway. And he has a lease, TransJamaica has a lease for 35 years, as I mentioned before. So during that period of time, TransJamaica has full right to all revenues which are generated by the highway. At the end of the 35-year concession, as I said, if the option to extend is not exercised, so the concession agreement includes an option to extend for another 35 years. So if the option to extend is not exercised by TransJamaica, then the assets of the roadway comes back to NROC at the end of the day. If it is extended, then TransJamaica obviously continues to operate the highway for a further 35 years. Any other question from the attendees?
One more, sir.
Mr. Bluefield had another question.
You haven't answered the last question in relation to the electronic formats of the meetings.
If I may, Chair, I'll answer. So you had asked that you're not seeing a period as to when these meetings will be held. So we are having this meeting today based on a group class action that we joined with the Jamaica Stock Exchange, and it allows shareholders who had joined that action from now to the end of this year to be able to host their meetings in this format, in a hybrid format or in a mixed format. What we are doing in the resolution to pass is to have the ability in the future, should the needs arise, without having another court action, to automatically be able to have the meeting in this fashion.
I understand all of that. But what I'm asking is this, that all these articles are going to be amended. I understand the purpose for this meeting because of the COVID situation.
Right.
I understand why some companies have to amend their articles. But what I don't understand and what I don't get from it is when you amend your article of association, it doesn't say at what point. There is no caveat to say when or at what point you're going to use an electronic format in the future. So there's no COVID next year or the year after. But nothing to inform the shareholder. Companies might just very well decide this is the route we're going to go and tell the shareholders that this is new normal. And you can have your meeting because you have already have it passed in your article of association. And I see the danger coming down the road where the minority shareholders are going to be locked out of their meetings.
Thank you, Mr. Bloomfield. I understand clearly your point and your concern, but also, so while there's a concern that the companies may adopt this format going forward, there is also the need for companies to be prepared. No one expected COVID. No one expected that we will be at this point where we're having meetings in this fashion. And a lot of companies, were forced to have their AGM at a very late stage, and the court order gave us the right to hold a meeting in this. We're just trying to prepare in the future. We can't say it's for a period of 5 years because in the same way we were not prepared or anticipating an event like this pandemic. We can't say what will happen in the future. What we can do is try to prepare. It's left up to companies now to validate their shareholders and to have them participate.
Thank you, Suzanne. Mr. Murray?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I still don't get a clear view of the asset of the company, like you are saying that NROC owns the, 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 the hardware, the actual property, and you are just leasing and managing, and then your financial report would be around that. But I expect if the road are dug up and you know they depreciate because of wear and tear, you have some interim report of the value of them at that stage, having spent money from the company's funds to bring it back up. You would report the new value, what value it is. Then we can see the appropriation of the expenditures were justly done. They use up for running the company and maintaining the company. I don't get a clear view of what you actually did in the
Chairman,
last probably 2 years. And going forward, I expect you to make those reports clear.
What we did in terms of what, Mr. Murray?
You weren't used to dealing with public affairs where you have to go to a AGM and report to us. But now that you are doing it, you need to make it very good and clear so that when we look, we can predict, right? Because you're reaching to natural existence now, and we have natural things. Input against output, efficiency.
All right.
Those factors are to be considered, and in the final analysis, the profit should be shared. You reach down to dividend and all those things. We need to see, because I am wondering how the dividend is going to be divided with the US listing and the local listing. Those things need to be cleared up. They need to be very clear.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Murray. I'll let Suzanne talk about the depreciation, how we calculate depreciation along the highway.
okay, so Mr. Barry, it seems you're asking what is the dollar value of this right that we have. What TJH owns is the right to operate. We have the right under the concession agreement. And you were saying what are the costs that are associated with that right? So if you look on our balance sheet, you'll see what we have as intangible assets. And for year 2019, the value of that asset was 249 million US dollars. This asset that we have on our books is depreciated every year on the basis of the traffic. So for example, for year 2019, the value of that depreciation was 16.8 million US dollars. And that is what went to our profit and loss for amortization of that intangible asset. Does that answer your question, Mr. Murray?
All right. So thank you, Mr. Murray. Mr. Staple?
I don't recall getting an explanation for this NROC grant, based on the fact that it's going to be based on toll road projection. And I'm asking, if the toll road projection is not met, what will eventually happen to this NROC grant?
All right. Let me ask Suzanne to explain the NROC grant again.
All right. So first of all, I'd like to mention that as January of this year, this grant was totally written off, and therefore it is no longer on our books. In 2020, yes, of this year. So, but for 2019, what was in the account was the amortization of that grant. So over the period of our operations, NROC as grantor has made a series of loans to TransJamaican. In 2011, when we were refinancing with the multilateral banks, those loans were converted into a grant, and it was a grant to the company. This grant was treated as a liability and was amortized and was expected to be amortized over the life of the concession on the basis of the traffic. As it is now for 2020, the grant was totally written back to retained earnings, and therefore it's no longer on our books.
Mr. Chair, if you turn me to page 47, consequent on NROC becoming a sole shareholder of the company, the Board of Directors on January 20th, 2020 passed a resolution to effect an immediate write-off of the amount of the amortizing grant to accumulated profit as at December 31st, 2019. Explain what is happening here.
So that is what I mentioned, that the grant that NROC had offered us in 2011, during the restructuring exercise, which took place, we started in the fourth quarter of last year and came into the first quarter of this year, that grant was written off. It was no longer existing. And so the balance as at year end 2019 was written to retained earnings.
So am I to assume, Mr. Chair, that everything is zero now, basically? And
In relation
everything
to
is
the
working?
In relation to the
NROC
grant,
grant,
yes.
okay.
Yes.
All right.
Let me just take another question from the shareholders online. Has there been a fall off in traffic since the recent toll increases in September? So as everyone is aware, we increased tolls in September. Normally we increase tolls in July, but given the pandemic, we increased tolls later than normally. We've not had any fall off in traffic, nor have we had any fall off in revenues as a result of the toll increases. Any other questions from the floor?
Is the name.
I'm sorry?
Robert is the name.
Robert.
All right. Concrete, how much of it is being used on the surface of the highway? Cement, concrete.
You have other questions, Robert?
No, that's the only question.
Okay, so our roadways are not, we don't utilize concrete on the surface. All our roadways are asphaltic concrete, what we call asphaltic concrete. It's a very thick layer though, so we have what we call we have two different kinds of asphalt layers. We have a thicker layer below, which is about 4 inches thick, and then we have a thicker layer, we have another layer on top, which is about 4 inches thick as well. So when we construct the highway, in total, there's about 8 inches of asphalt that we have on the roadway. This is obviously much higher than you have anywhere else in Jamaica on roadways.
So you don't use any cement company products?
No, so we only,
All imported asphalt
so
material?
except at the lanes of the toll plazas on the bridge
But the
decks.
highway itself?
No, not on the highway itself.
Oh, so you wouldn't consider using that with,
Sounds like you have a product, Robert.
well, not a product, but cement company,
Right.
investor, so looking out for sales.
Right, so it's a continuous assessment that we do
Yeah.
to see how the cost of asphalt balances with the cost of
But
concrete.
they promote it a lot. The cement company promoted that concrete is good for the roads.
But for the most part, when we're doing rehabilitation, we just rehabilitate with a thin layer, because obviously on the highway we don't allow it to break down. So obviously you don't see potholes or defects developing along the highway. So we are able to get to where we're just putting a thin layer on top of it, and it lasts for another 10, 15 years.
Okay. All right. So no concrete sales that way.
No.
Mr. Chair, one last question. Am I correct in saying that a properly laid asphalt road has a lifespan of some 20 years.
All right, so a roadway is designed, and it's designed based on a life. So when you design a road, you assess how much traffic you expect to be on the road during the life that you're designing for. So you can design for 10 years, you can design for 20 years, you can design for 30 years. Normally roads are designed for 20 years, but they can be designed for shorter or they can be designed for longer.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome, sir. If there are, I'm sorry.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Pauline Gordon, shareholder. I have an observation from the director's report.
Yes,
It's about the stolen fencing.
yes,
I noticed over the years the amount of fencing stolen has decreased.
yes.
My question is, was there some kind of security measure put in place for that? Or are we going to continue seeing stolen fencing so that I know that there's a cost to all of this? Also, is there any sort of camera, that would be linked to Jamaica Eye for any kind of security device, security measure, so we can prevent this? Also, is this a sort of a chargeable offense wherein if the camera is there and you catch the person who's stealing or so, you can bring charge against them? That's my observation.
Thank you, Ms. Gordon. Yeah, so the issue of stolen fence has been an issue for us for a number of years. Over the years, it has come down significantly as we have found different ways to install the fence. So we have modified the type of fence that we used to make it a little less attractive. So we started with chain link fence, which seemed to have been very, very attractive. Then we moved to barbed wire with what we call hog wire. We started painting the fencing. We had a program of working with the police in the communities, going into the communities to look for the fencing. We've now been able to, in a number of locations, tack the fencing in place, put it down in smaller sections. So we've done a number of things over the years, and this has resulted in significant lower theft of fence taking place. We've also improved the community involvement in monitoring the highway. So we have a number of people now on the highway who are responsible for, who are from the community and monitor the highway in terms of whenever there are breaks in the fence to close it back up to prevent animals from coming on the roadway. And so all those initiatives has led to a significant reduction in the amount of fencing that has been stolen. I mean, even if fencing is not stolen, we still have to replace fence because obviously fence wears out over time and rusts and deteriorates. So even when the fence is not being stolen, we still are replacing fence.
And also consideration was given to like different material to use, cost effective, more cost effective, anything maybe?
Right, so as I said, we've changed the type of fencing that we've been using over the years. So at this point, this is the most cost effective material that we're using. We've not been seeing a lot of theft, but it's something that we continue to monitor. If there are no further questions, I'd like to ask that the audited financials for the year ended December 31, 2019, and the reports of the directors and auditors be and are hereby adopted. May I have a motion for resolution? Mr. Staple, thank you, sir. A seconder? Mr. Bevan. Thank you, Mr. Bevan. All in favor of the resolutions? Anyone against? I declare the motion carried. I'd like to now move to the motion to change the order of business. Oh, I did that already.
You did it.
I did that already, I'm sorry. We'll move on then to the remuneration of the directors. That the board of directors be and are hereby authorized to fix the remuneration of the individual directors. May I have a mover? Mr. Bloomfield? Seconded? Suzanne? All in favor of the resolution? Aye. All against? Anyone against? I declare the motion carried. We'll now move on to the fourth item of business, the appointment of the auditors and their remuneration. That Ernst & Young Chartered Accountants, having agreed to continue in office as auditors, be and are hereby appointed auditors of the company to hold office until the next annual general meeting at a remuneration to be agreed by the directors of the company. May I have a mover? Edwards? Teresa Edwards. Thank you, Teresa. Seconded? Alok? All in favor of the resolution, say aye.
Aye.
All against? Anyone against? I hereby declare that motion carried. Amendment of the Articles of Incorporation by special resolution. That pursuant to Section 10 of the Companies Act, 2004, the Articles of Incorporation of the company be altered by adding after Article 67, the following article to be numbered 67A, as detailed in the annual report and notice of the annual general meeting. May I have a mover for this resolution? Mr. Staple. Seconded? Ms. Gordon. All in favor of the resolution, say aye. Anyone against? I declare the motion carried. We'll now move to the second item, which will be taken as the final item of business, and I'll invite Suzanne to move the resolutions in relation to the election of directors.
Okay, we'll now take the resolution for the election of directors. Resolution 2.1, and this is to have Mr. Mitchie Bell B, and is hereby elected as director. Sorry, and is hereby elected as, that is John Mitchie Bell B, and is hereby elected as director. May I have a mover for this motion? Ms. Edwards? Okay, thank you, Ms. Edwards. And a seconder? Mr. Bloomfield, thank you. All in favor, say aye. Okay, we declare that motion has been carried. Second, that Mr. Ian Deere be and is hereby elected as director of the company. May I have a mover? Mr. Staple, thank you. Seconder? Ms. Martin, thank you. All in favor, say aye. Okay, we'll declare that that motion is also carried. Okay, thirdly, that Mr. Ivan Anderson be and is hereby elected as director of the company. May I have a mover? Okay, Mr. Staple, Mr. Bevan. A seconder? Sir, your name? Martin Williams? Mark Williams, thank you. All in favor, say aye. Okay, so we will declare that this motion is also carried. I'd like to also point out that we received 7 proxies, and for all the resolutions that were passed, that were carried, the proxies indicate that they also were passed. I'll now hand over back to the chairman.
Thank you, Suzanne. If there are no further questions, then this ends the formal part of our meeting, which I now declare closed. Ladies and gentlemen, as we formally close this section, thank you all for your attendance, and special thanks to all those who made today a success. We look forward to your continued support in the coming year. Please continue to keep safe, and we look forward to welcome you to our next AGM. We would like those of you who are here with us to remain for some light refreshments and to feel free to talk to any of the directors and ask any further questions which you may have. Thank you very much and have a good day. Roundabout. Bypass. Yes. Project. I'm sorry. Right. So, as the Minister of Finance had mentioned at the time, there are a number of projects that the government of Jamaica is looking at. We talked about the Maypen to Mandeville section of the highway, which the government is actually currently constructing, and the Montague bypass, which is a 15-kilometer road around Montague. So that project is in design by the government of Jamaica. And so we expect that once the roadway is completed, it's going to take maybe 3 to 4 years to be completed. Once that is completed, then TransJamaican will then have an option like anyone else to look at whether